Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How's everyone doing? Inshallah, everyone's fine. Let's get started. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who is not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He speaks without sound or letter or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light. He's not a spirit. He has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled master, Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And as always, I ask Allah to grant me and to grant all of you sincere intentions, that we attend this class and we review our lessons, and that we do all of our good deeds in obedience to him, desire for his reward, and that we don't include in our intention any dunya benefit, inshallah. That said, we're continuing in this book, the 7 Hadeeth, obligatory knowledge that every Muslim must know. Last week, we were talking about how you remove najasa. Okay, so we were on page 13 in this book. We did section 3F1, which deals with how to remove najasa. And we talked about, in summary, what we said was that to remove najasa, you pour purifying water onto the place that needs to be cleaned until the mass of the najasa is gone, as well as its 3 traces, its smell, its taste, and its color. This is called purifying the place of najasa. Today, inshallah, we're going to move to the next section, which deals with a special type of najasa removal called Istanja. So Istanja is a type of najasa removal that you do after using the restroom. And we're going to talk a bit later, but there's 2 ways to do Istanja. The first way is to treat, the filth that comes out of you when you use the bathroom, to treat it just like you treat any other cleaning of najasa, which is to say, you get it off of your body by pouring water on that place until the mass of the najasa is gone, as well as its 3 traces. That's the basic way you make Istanja. But in the case of Istanja, there's a second way that we are also free to use. It involves stones or something that has the same ruling as stones. And we'll talk about all of that today, insha'Allah ta'ala. So let's talk first. Let's start by reading section 3F2. It has the title Istanja. It says, any moist thing that comes out of either of the 2 exits must be cleaned in order for one's salat to be valid. What does that mean? It means that if anything comes out of one of your 2 exits, okay, every human has a front exit, which is where urine comes out, and everyone has a back exit, which is where feces comes out. If anything comes out of one of these 2 exits and it's moist, this is an important condition. If it's moist and it comes out, then you must purify that area before you can perform a valid salat. Why? Because moisture is necessary for contamination to occur. For example, let's say that there's a dog walking down the street. Okay, dogs are najas. Okay, so if that dog is perfectly dry and my leg is perfectly dry, then if the side of that dog brushes up against my leg does not get contaminated by the najasa of the dog. Why? Because there is no moisture present. The dog's najis. My leg is not najis, but my leg doesn't get contaminated because there's no moisture. Okay, moisture is required for najasa to contaminate something which is not in and of itself najis. And once you understand that moisture is required for contamination to occur, then you would understand, for example, that if it wasn't the side of the dog that brushed against my leg, let's say instead the dog's nose touched my leg. The nose of a dog usually is moist. So if the dog's nose is what touched my leg, well, then my leg would be contaminated by dog filth. And if you recall from last week, the way you purify an area contaminated by dog filth is by pouring water on it until the mass of the filth is gone, as well as its 3 traces. And that once all of that is done, that's considered to be 1 wash. After that, you have to do 6 more washes for a total of 7 washes. And one of these 7 washes needs to involve not just pure water, but water that has soil mixed with it. All of that was talked about last week. Alhamdulillah. So going back to this sentence, it says, any moist thing that comes out of either of the 2 exits must be cleaned in order for one's salat to be valid. So I want to go back to this notion of moist. Okay, why is it that it's only the moist things that you have to make istanja from? It's because if something comes out of your body with no moisture, then the exterior of your body will not be contaminated because there's no moisture present. And if the exterior is not contaminated, well, then there's nothing for you to wash. You can make a salat. All right. There is one exception to this rule, and that is semen. Okay. If semen comes out of the man, or if the woman's version of semen comes out of the woman, this is a moist substance. But even though it's moist, you do not have to make istanja from it. And that's because in the Shafi'i school, semen is not najis. It's a pure substance. So even though it's moist, it doesn't contaminate anything because it's not najis. So you don't have to make istanja from semen, but you do have to make istanja from anything else that comes out of one of the 2 exits that's moist. So yes, that means that if something comes out that's not moist, then you would not need to make istanja. Like imagine that, imagine you made a bowel movement and your poop came out bone dry. In that case, you would not have to make istanja, although I don't think that happens to humans. It does happen to camels, but I don't think that happens to humans. The next thing I would say, or I normally say when I talk about this lesson, is that the rules of istanja applies to anything that's moist that comes out of these 2 exits, one of the 2 exits. It doesn't matter if the thing that came out was something normal, like urine or feces, and it doesn't matter if whatever came out was something unusual, like blood or stones or worms. If something comes out of one of these exits, if it's moist, then you must make istanja afterwards. Okay. It says, there are 2 ways to purify the area. It says there are 2 ways to purify the area. Number 1 is the way we talked about last week. You treat istanja like any other kind of removal of najasa. It says, wash the area with purifying water until the najasa and its traces are gone. Okay, so that's the primary way of removing najasa. It's the way that applies in every situation, whether it's istanja or not istanja. You can always use that method because it's the basic method. But for istanja, there's a second method, which you cannot use except for istanja. You cannot use method number 2 for other types of removing najasa. You can only use it if it's istanja, meaning you can only do this if you're cleaning yourself after using the restroom. Okay. What is the second way that you can make istanja? It says, wipe the area with stones. 3 or more times until the mass of the najasa is removed, even if traces remain. I'm going to read it again. It says, wipe the area with stones 3 or more times until the mass of the najasa is removed, even if traces remain. So one key difference between method number 2 and method number 1 is that in method number 2, you don't have to remove all the traces. In method number 1, you have to pour water until the najasa is gone and the 3 traces. The color, taste, and smell are also gone. If you use method 2, then you're going to wipe the area until the mass of the najasa is gone. But if the color, taste, or smell, or even if all 3 of them remain, then the area is considered to be sufficiently purified for you to make salat. All right, let's look at this sentence in a bit more detail. It says, wipe the area with stones. Okay, so the substance that you're going to use, if you choose method 2, is going to be something, it can be a rock, like a stone, or it can be something like a stone. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit later about how you can tell if something is like a stone, but I'll tell you now, just to save you a bunch of time, toilet paper is like a stone. So you can use toilet paper the same way you could use a stone. And we'll talk about why that's the case. But it says, wipe the area with stones or something that's like a stone 3 or more times. This is a condition. If you're going to use method number 2, it's a condition that you wipe a minimum of 3 times. You can wipe more than 3 times, but if you wipe fewer than 3 times, then method number 2 is not going to put you in a situation where you can make a valid salat. Okay, in order for you to be sufficiently purified for salat, you will have to wipe at least 3 times, 3 or more times. It says, wipe the area with stones 3 or more times until the mass of the najasa is removed, even if traces remain. This is the second condition. So you're going to wipe with stones or something like a stone until 2 conditions are fulfilled. Condition number 1 is that you wipe 3 or more times. Condition number 2 is that the mass of the najasa has been completely removed. So what that means is if you removed all of the mass of the najasa on your first wipe, you still have to wipe 2 more times in order to fulfill the first condition. And if you wipe 3 times, but all the mass of the najasa has not been removed, then you're going to have to continue wiping more than 3 times now until the najasa is removed. That's going to be required to fulfill the second condition. You have not made istanja unless, talking about option number 2, you have not made istanja unless both of those conditions are fulfilled. You have to wipe 3 or more times, and on top of that, you have to remove the mass of the najasa. It says, even if traces remain. What does that mean? What it means is that when you're wiping away filth from your body, whether it's urine, poop, whatever it is, there are certain traces which simply cannot be removed by a stone or something like a stone. There are some traces that can be removed by water. Some of these traces can be removed by small bits of pottery, but they can't be removed by something like a stone. So even if you wiped your butt and you pulled up all of the feces that was there, you might find that the smell of the feces would remain, or the taste of it, or maybe even the color in some places might remain. Okay? If you choose to do option number 2 for your istanja, those 3 traces are what we call excused. Okay? If the taste, color, or smell of the najasa remains after you remove the mass of the najasa and after you wiped 3 times or more, if the traces remain, those traces are excused. They're not going to invalidate your salat, even though those traces are still najis. Okay, if the color, taste, or smell is still there, then that part of your body is still contaminated by najasa, but it's excused in the salat, meaning that it doesn't invalidate your salat. It does not mean that those traces somehow are not najis anymore, it does not mean that your body is completely purified. It means that it's excused in the salat. So your body is sufficiently purified for you to make salat, but it's not to the point where you're completely purified. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you wiped your butt with toilet paper and you removed all of the feces, but the traces were still there, well, then if you if you sat down in a bucket of water and the part with the 3 traces touched the water in the bucket, it would contaminate the bucket of water. Okay, it would contaminate the bucket of water because najasa has touched the water. Okay, I just want to make that clear. The traces, they're still najasa. Okay, or how do I put it? The area with the traces is still contaminated by najasa, but that contamination is excused. It doesn't invalidate the salat. Another thing that I usually mention here is about the number of wipes. So the requirement is that you wipe 3 times. That's one requirement. The other requirement is that you remove the najasa. And to do both of these, it might require more than 3 wipes. You might have to wipe, say, 7 times in order to meet all the requirements, and that's fine. But know that it's sunnah, recommended, not obligatory. It's recommended, it's sunnah to wipe an odd number of times. So if, for example, you wiped 3 times and you didn't have all of the mass of the najasa removed, and so you needed to wipe a 4th time, and now everything is removed after 4 wipes. In this case, it's better if you wipe 1 more time, and just to make it an odd number. So it'll be 5 wipes, inshallah. What does it say next? It says, this method, talking about option number 2, it says this method is valid even if water is available. This method is valid even if water is available. So some people, they might think that doing Istanja with stones or toilet paper or something like that, they think, some people might think in their mind that this is kind of like tayammum, that it's something you only do when water's not available. That's not the case. Okay, tayammum, you only do it if you can't use water. But Istanja with stones, you can do it if you want. Even if you have plenty of water, you can still use stones to do your Istanja if you choose. Okay, it's your option. You can choose to use water or you can choose to use stones. It's better to use water than it is to use stones. That's because the water will remove the najasa as well as the traces, whereas the stones will only remove the najasa, not the traces. So you'll be more clean if you use water. That's why it's better to use water than it is to use stones. But what's better still is for you to use stones and then after that use water. That's better still, because then what happens if you do that is that the stones will remove the mass of the najasa, then the water will remove the traces, and as you wipe yourself while using the water, you won't get any najasa on your hand because the stones already removed the najasa without your hand needing to touch it. So that's the best way. Overall, that's the best way. Someone asked, can you use a bidet? You can use a bidet. You can use whatever you want to use as long as you follow one of these 2 methods. So if the water is being poured onto the place, okay, the water is being poured onto the place, and the najasa and the traces are removed, then you've made Istanja. What you don't want to do, okay, and I don't know if this happens frequently with a bidet, but what some people do, people who have like a bottle of water on the side or like a watering can or something like that, what some people do, and this is a big mistake, so please pay attention. What some people do when they wipe their behinds, they take the bottle of water, they make a cup with their hands, they pour the water into their hand and fill up their water with the hand. Then they fill up their hand with the water, and then when they wipe their behind, what they do is they sort of like take this puddle of water in their hand and they lift it up into the butt crack and then start wiping. This is not the right way to make Istanja. Because what you have in your hand is a small amount of water. It's less than 2 qullas. If you raise this water up, as soon as any of the filth from your behind touches that water, it contaminates the whole thing of water. And then as you wipe moving it around, all you're doing is contaminating more of your body. You're making yourself more filthy instead of purifying yourself. This is what you want to avoid. You want to make sure that the water pours onto your backside or your front side, whichever place you're washing. You want to make sure the water is pouring onto the place, that you're not lifting the water up into the place. And, if you use a bidet, this is something you may want to keep in mind to make sure that the water is like, you want to be, in the case of a bidet, you want to be almost like hosing yourself down. So you're not just lifting a bunch of water up. You're like hosing the filth off of your body, inshallah. For those of you who use bottles for your Istanja, what you should do is you should lift the bottle, hold the bottle behind you, and pour the water into the butt crack. Don't fill up your hand and then lift a handful of water. All right, pour the water onto the place, and you can wipe with your left hand to clean. But you want the water to be pouring down. You don't want the water to be pooling with najasa in it. All right, let's go back to the book. So after mentioning these 2 ways to make Istanja, one way that's all water, one way that's stones, it says certain other conditions that need to be met in the case of stones. It says option 2 is not an option if the najasa has spread beyond its exit area or if it has dried. So there are 2 cases where you will not be able to use stones, where you're going to have to use water. So option 2 will be off the table in these 2 cases. What are the 2 cases where you can't use stones? Case number 1 is if the filth has moved from its exit area. If the filth has moved from its exit area, then you cannot use stones. What is the exit area? In the case of the rear exit, the exit area is what's between the butt cheeks. Okay, it's commonly called in America the butt crack. All right, what's between the butt cheeks, or to be more precise, the part that's exposed when a person squats and disappears when a person stands up straight, that area is called the exit area. So if a person defecates and filth is in that area between the 2 butt cheeks, then you can use stones or toilet paper or the like. However, if the feces spreads beyond that area, like say, it spreads to a part of the butt cheek that would still be visible if you were standing up straight. If the filth spreads to that part of the butt cheek, well then that filth which is there must be washed with water. It cannot be washed with stones. All right, it's at that point, it's almost like it's not Istanja. It's like it's just removing regular najasa because it's not in the place where Istanja can happen. It's not in the place where option 2 is valid. So if the najasa moves away from the exit area, you can't use stones. The exit area in the rear is what's between the butt cheeks. The exit area in the front for men is the head of the penis. So if urine, runs, if it runs along the head of the penis and stops on the head of the penis, then you can use stones. You can use toilet paper. You can use all of that. But if it runs beyond the head of the penis, it actually touches the shaft part, well, then you're no longer permitted to use stones or whatever is similar to a stone, like toilet paper. At that point, you must use water. For the woman, the exit area is the part, it's the front exit where the water comes out. And how do I say this? If the urine reaches the entrance of the penis, if the urine reaches the place where the penis would actually enter, then in that case, it's gone beyond its exit area. At that point, you would have to use water. You would not be able to simply use like paper towels or stones. So that's one case where you can't use stones. That's what? One case where you can't use stones is if the filth that came out has moved beyond the exit area. The second case where you can't use stones is if it has dried. So if you're going to use stones, you have to use it while this filth that came out of your body is still wet. If the filth has dried, then you can't use stones. You're going to have to use water. This is why if you're going to use stones or something like a stone, toilet paper counts. It's like a stone. If you're going to use stones to make Istanja, this is why the scholars have recommended that you start with the rear, that you wipe your butt first and then wipe your front second. And this is because feces will dry faster than urine will. Okay, so it's important that you wipe there first before it dries. And then you can wipe the urine second because it takes longer to dry. Okay, but once it dries, you cannot use stones. All right, next part. It says anything qualifies as a stone if it is. All right, what you're about to follow, what will follow right now are the 5 conditions for something to count as a stone. Anything that meets these 5 conditions is able to be used as a stone for Istanja. Okay, you'll find that stones meet these conditions, and so anything else that also meets these conditions is like a stone, and you can use it for Istanja. What's condition number 1? It says anything qualifies as a stone if it is, number 1, uprooting. So the first thing that needs to be true about something for you to be able to use it like a stone in Istanja is that it is uprooting. What does that word even mean? What is uprooting? It means that if you wipe with it, it lifts up the filth. For example, if I had filth on the table here, if someone smudged a little bit of poop here, if I decided to wipe that poop with a glass bottle, okay, I got a glass bottle right here. If I decided to wipe poop with a glass bottle, the glass bottle would not lift the poop up off of the table. All it would do is spread the poop around, okay, because a glass bottle is not uprooting. It doesn't lift it up off of the surface. Whereas if I used a rock, for example, I could scrape that rock across the table and find that now the poop that had been on the table is now on the stone. That's called uprooting. If you wipe with it, it gets it up off of the surface that it had been on. So if you want to use something as if it's a rock for purposes of Istanja, the first condition is that it needs to be uprooting. It needs to be something that will lift up the filth and not just spread it around. Second condition is that whatever you use as a rock must be pure. It must be pure. What does that mean? It means that the substance you're using like a rock is not in and of itself najas, nor is it contaminated by some kind of najasa. So if you're out in the desert somewhere and you go to the bathroom and you're looking for a rock to wipe with and you find some old, camel poop, know that you cannot wipe with camel poop because camel poop is najas. It's filthy. You can only do option number 2. You can only use stones if the thing that you're using is pure. It will only count as a stone if it's pure. Number 3, the third condition is that it's solid. So in order for something to count as a stone, the first condition is that it's uprooting. The second condition is that it's pure. The third condition is that it's solid. It needs to be one solid object. Okay, this is why it's not permissible to use sand. Okay, you can't just take a handful of sand and wipe your behind with it. Okay, because the sand is not one single solid object. Whatever you use, it needs to be solid. What's the fourth condition? The fourth condition is that it be dry. So whatever you plan to use as a stone for Istanja, it must be uprooting, pure, solid, and it must be dry. It must be dry. So if you're using something that's wet, you cannot use it for Istanja. or at least you can't use it like a stone. And if you do use it, then it will render anything it touched, any place that was touched by something wet now can only be cleaned with water. So even if you threw it away and found a dry rock, the fact that you touched somewhere in the exit area with something wet means that that place can only be purified with water now. Number 5, last option. It's a condition. If you plan to use something as a stone, it's a condition that the thing you're using not be religiously respectable. Okay? So if you're going to use something for Istanja, it must meet 5 conditions. It must be uprooting. It must be pure. It must be solid. It must be dry. And the last condition is that it must not be religiously respectable. So anything that according to the Islamic religion we have to respect, that we have to treat in a particular respectful way, then we're not allowed to use it for Istanja. For example, you cannot tear a page out of the Quran. You cannot tear a page out of the Mus'haf and use it for Istanja. Okay, that is not permissible. In fact, that is kufr. That's blasphemy. That would take you out of Islam. Similarly, you cannot take any piece of paper that you know has one of the names of Allah written on it. You cannot use that piece of paper for Istanja. Nor can you use any paper that contains Islamic knowledge on it. So if it's a page from a book of fiqh, or a book of Hadeeth, or a book of mustalah, or a book of aqidah, any piece of paper that has Islamic knowledge on it, this is religiously respectable. You cannot use it for Istanja. Also, certain types of food in general is religiously respectable. So you cannot use, for example, a slice of bread or a leaf of lettuce for your Istanja. Okay, the religion requires that we treat food in a respectable way, so you cannot use that. I mentioned any paper that has one of the names of Allah on it is respectable, but that also means a paper that has one of the names of the prophets on it also is religiously respectable, and you cannot use it to make Istanja. But here there's a special thing you need to understand. When we say that it has the name of a prophet on it, we mean that the name is actually referring to the prophet. Okay? If I have a piece of paper that says Muhammad on it, okay, if it's talking about Muhammad Jenkins from down the street, then this piece of paper is not respectable. But if it's talking about Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the one who was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to man as a mercy to mankind, that Muhammad, if it's referring to that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, well then that sheet of paper that has that name on it is respectable. Okay, this book here, it says Yahya at the top. See, Yahya. That's my name. It's referring to me. It's not referring to our master Yahya, the prophet alayhi salam. It's referring to me. Okay, so a sheet of paper with my name on it is not respectable. But a sheet of paper with the name of Prophet Yahya on it is respectable. I just want to make sure that that distinction is understood. And now that we've gone through these 5 conditions, you understand why toilet paper counts as a stone, because toilet paper is uprooting, it's pure, it's solid, it's dry, and it's not religiously respectable. So because it meets all 5 conditions, you may use it the same way that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum used to use stones. Are there any questions about Istanja? I'll take some questions now. I see the bidet question. What else do we have? There's an aqidah question here, which is not really related to the subject matter of the question of the class. Okay. Well, inshallah, there are no questions. After that, we go to the next section of the book, which is the list of things that are najasa. It says section 3F3, list of najasat. Okay, what you find here is the entire list of everything that's najasa, everything that's najas. There are 15 things that are najas according to the Shafi'i school, and here, inshallah, you will see what all of them are. starting with number 1. It says the following 15 things are najis. This is the whole list. There's nothing exempted. There's nothing left out. Okay? This is everything that's najis according to the Shafi'i school. Number 1, urine. So number 1 on the list of things that's najis is urine. Okay? It doesn't matter if this urine is urine from a human being or if it's urine from some kind of animal. Urine is najis. And I put this one at the top of the list because for a person to contaminate himself with urine is an enormous sin. It's an enormous sin by ijma, by consensus. It's an enormous sin to contaminate yourself with urine. And it's mentioned that the number one cause for Muslims to be tortured in the grave is urine getting on their bodies or their clothing. Okay, we'll talk about torture in the grave a little bit later in this same hadith. But you know that after a person dies, we're talking about the time before the end of the world, before the day of judgment. Okay, when a person dies, they're buried in the ground. They stay there. Okay, their bodies may or may not decay depending on their situation, but they stay in the ground. And then sometime after the end of the world, the day of judgment comes and those people, their bodies are resurrected and then they get judged by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sent to either paradise or hell. During the time in between when you're buried and when the day of judgment comes, the dead person is said to be in his grave. Okay, he's said to be in his grave. Now, there is such a thing as torture in the grave. We're not talking about torture on the day of judgment. We're talking about torture in the grave. Okay? Kafirs, of course, are going to be tortured in the grave. But even believers, even Muslims, if they were sinful in this life, there is a risk that they will be tortured in the grave. Okay? And we're taught that for a Muslim, for a believer who does get tortured in the grave, the number one reason for that to happen is urine, contaminating oneself with urine, meaning it gets on your body or in your clothes. This is why you need to be extra careful when cleaning yourself after using the restroom. And I'm not talking about Istanja right now. You do need to be careful about Istanja, definitely. But I'm talking about something called Istinza with a Z. Istinza. It means getting the urine out of your body. Okay, this is a problem for people, and it's in particular a problem for men. Okay, a man, if a man urinates, the urine goes out of his body like normal. But what often happens is, there's 2 or 3 drops of urine that don't come out. They're still in the shaft. They haven't come out yet. And so what will he do? He'll make istanja, he'll clean himself, he'll put his clothes on, he'll go walk out. And after he takes a few steps, the movement of walking causes those last couple drops to come out. And what happens? It gets in his clothes or it gets on his body. And he may not even feel it. Okay, this is something that's very, it's the number one cause of torture in the grave. So it's something we all need to think about. My advice to you is to do what's necessary to get those last drops out. Okay? There's lots of different methods for doing that. One method is, since of course the proper Islamic manners are to sit down when using the restroom. Even if you're a man, you should sit. Even if you're only peeing, you should still sit. So if you sit down to pee, the man can stand up and then sit down again, and stand up and sit down again. And just kind of go up and down a few times. That might be enough to get those last drops out. He can also walk back and forth a few times to get the last drops out. Sometimes if you cough very hard, not a soft cough, I'm not talking about, no, if you go like, really, really, really hard cough, it may be enough to get those drops out. And there are also other methods that some people have, but know that it's your responsibility to get those last few drops out and ensure that you don't contaminate yourself with them. Okay, because none of us want to be tortured in our graves. Number 2, the number 2 item in the list of things that are najasa is feces. Whether that feces is the feces of a human being or whether it's the feces of an animal, feces is najis. Number 3, blood. Blood is najis, whether it's the blood of a human or the blood of something else. Blood is najis. Number 4, pus. Pus, for those of you who don't know, it's like a yellowish fluid that comes out of the body when a person gets certain types of injuries, certain types of cuts. You might see a yellowish fluid come out. It's called pus. Pus is najis. Number 5, vomit. Vomit is that which returns to the mouth after having reached the stomach. Okay, so if you swallow something and it goes to your stomach, if after that it comes out into the mouth, then this is called vomit and it's najis. This is called vomit and it's najis. Okay, when the vomit reaches your mouth is now contaminated by najis. Okay, a person might think that as long as you don't swallow it back, then it's no problem. Well, even if you don't swallow this najasa back into your stomach, even if you do spit it out, your mouth is contaminated by it. So you're going to have to purify your mouth by pouring water into the mouth and rinsing it around and gargling and in that way purifying everything that can be purified. Number 6, madhi. Okay, madhi is an Arabic word. I've seen this word translated as pre-seminal fluid, as you see in the book. I think it's more commonly referred to by the rather vulgar word pre-cum. But madhi is something that's released by men and women. It's released from their body when they get sexually excited. Okay, this fluid, some people just call it being wet. I mean, there's all kinds of slang names for it, but this fluid is najis. This fluid is najis. If some of this fluid has come out of your body, if it's on your body or it's in your clothes, then you cannot perform a valid salat until you have purified anything that was contaminated by it. Number 7, wadi. I have no idea how to translate wadi into English. This is an Arabic word. It refers to a fluid that comes out of the body. This fluid is like clear or white. It sometimes comes out like if a person lifts something that's extremely heavy and he strains himself, he may find that a fluid of this sort comes out. If this happens to one of you, know that that fluid that comes out is called wadi, and it also is najis. Number 8, wine. Wine is grape juice. Okay, if you take grapes and you mash them, you collect the juice from them, that juice is called grape juice. If that grape juice sits for a while, it will turn into wine. Okay, when we say wine, we're talking about fermented grape juice. Right? Wine is najis. Okay, now wine is also a little bit special because that grape juice, after it sits for a while, it turns to wine. But if you let it keep sitting even longer, the wine will eventually turn to vinegar. Vinegar is not najis, but wine is najis. Okay, so the grape juice in the beginning was not najis. It's permissible to drink. Then after it fermented, it turned to wine, which is najis and not permissible to drink. But after a while, it turns to vinegar, which is now pure again and permissible to drink. Okay, so it's the wine stage in which it's najis. Number 9, it says other alcoholic beverages. So just like how wine is najis, it's also true that every other intoxicating drink is also najis. That includes beer, liquor, whatever all that stuff is, gin and vodka and whiskey and, all that stuff. It's all najis. Number 10, dogs. Okay, dogs are najis. Dogs are najis. And this is probably a good time for me to mention that this book may be written in English. Okay, it's written in English so that we can understand it. but the rules of the Sharia are understood from the Arabic language. So the Arabic language is how you can only understand the Sharia through the Arabic language. And when it comes to dogs, there's some key differences between Arabic and English. Okay. In Arabic, a fox cannot be called a dog. Also, a wolf cannot be called a dog in the Arabic language. Okay. So when the Prophet ﷺ said, if a dog drinks from one of your containers, then wash it 7 times, one of them with soil, this hadith does not include foxes or wolves. It only includes those things that in the Arabic language are called dogs. Now in English, people often refer to wolves as dogs. Okay, in English. But in Arabic, a wolf is not a dog. And so this rule that dogs are najis does not apply to wolves, just to make that clear. Number 11 on the list of things that's najis are pigs. Okay, so pigs are najis. I mean, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Number 12, this one's interesting. Something that is part dog and or part pig. That such a thing would be najis. So imagine, I don't know if this stuff actually happens, but imagine that a dog and a pig produce an offspring. That offspring, which is part dog and part pig, is also najis. Even though it's not fully dog, even though it's not fully pig, it's still najis because it's part dog and part pig. Similarly, if those animals, produce the offspring with something else, it would still be najis. So like if a pig and a sheep produce the offspring, that offspring would be najis just because it's part pig. If a dog and a wolf produce an offspring, and this I know does happen. If a dog and a wolf produce an offspring, that offspring would be najis. Even though the wolf is not najis, it's part dog, and the dog is najis. Okay, so if an animal is part dog or part pig, or part dog and part pig, then that animal is also counted among the things that are najis. Number 13, it says dead animals, meta, or what has separated from a living animal, except for humans, fish, and locusts. All right. So among the things that are najis are dead animals. So the basic rule is that an animal, while it's alive, is pure. And once it dies, it's najis. So while it's alive, it's not najis. But when it dies, it's najis. That's the basic rule. But there are exceptions to this rule. You've already seen some of the exceptions just now. Dogs, pigs, things that are part dog and or part pig. These things are najis even while they're alive. So they go against the basic rule. The basic rule is that animals are pure when they're alive, but not dogs, pigs, or things that are part dog or part pig. They're najis even while they're alive. Okay? But once the animal dies, that carcass is najis. It means it's religiously filthy. It means that we have an obligation to avoid coming into contact with it. We don't let our bodies or our clothes come into contact with najis unnecessarily. Okay, so dead animals are najis. Why am I repeating this so much? Because I want everyone to understand. Dead animals are najis. So when you go to Popeyes and, somebody gets you that chicken sandwich, when you look at that chicken, the first thought you should have is, hey, man, this is a dead animal. This is najis. I can't eat this. It's najis. Dead animals are najis. This is why every kind of meat that you see, because you know that meat is either a dead animal or it was cut from a living animal, in which case it still counts as a dead animal, you know that meat has a ruling of being najis and therefore forbidden for you to eat. Yes, it's true. There is a case where if the animal is killed in a particular way outlined by the Sharia, that the resulting carcass of that dead animal will not be najis. It is possible. In that case, that resulting carcass will be halal for us to eat if all the conditions are met. That is true. But you cannot assume when you see a piece of meat that it's halal. Okay? The basic rule is that dead animals are najis. And you cannot claim that some piece of meat that you see somehow does not follow the basic rule. You cannot claim that without evidence. It requires evidence for you to say this piece of meat, even though it is a dead animal, it's not najis. Okay, you need to either know, because you witnessed it yourself, that this animal was killed in a way that protects the resulting carcass from being najis. Like you might have evidence because you witnessed it. Or it could be that a trustworthy person who witnessed how it was slaughtered informed you that it was slaughtered in the proper way and that meat is halal, that is not najis. Or it could be that a trustworthy person who did not himself see it, but that trustworthy person was told by a trustworthy person who saw the animal slaughtered. And, there might be a chain. If there's a chain of people back to the ones who actually saw it slaughtered, and those people are trustworthy, well, then you have evidence in that case to rule that the meat is not najis. But in the absence of that, you have to assume that meat is najis. Okay? As for trustworthiness, when it comes to this, a lot of the scholars, they're not, super strict. So, for example, if you go to a place, you don't have to investigate the person who runs the halal meat shop to determine if he's trustworthy or not. You don't have to investigate his whole life story to see if he meets the conditions of trustworthiness. Okay, if you ask him if the meat is trustworthy, as long as in your heart, you truly believe he's being honest with you, then you can accept what he says. Okay, but the person himself needs to know, like he needs to have knowledge about the meat. Okay, and then as long as you believe him, then it's not the same as being trustworthy, but in this case, you can still take what he says if in your heart you believe he's being honest. Okay, but he needs to know what he's talking about. Okay, I don't like telling a lot of stories, but I'll tell this one. One day when I was down in Florida, I went to a Pakistani restaurant. People took me there because they said, "Oh yeah, there's a halal restaurant over here. Let's go there." I said, "Okay." I go to the restaurant. A woman comes out to serve us. I asked her, I said, "Is your meat halal?" She said, "Yes." I asked her, "How do you know?" Because I want to know if she even investigated herself. I said, "How do you know it's halal?" She said, "Because when I'm cutting up the meat in the kitchen, I say Bismillah every time I make a cut." That's what she says. And so, of course, my response was, I'll take the fish. This woman, she doesn't understand what it means to be halal. When, a lot of Muslims, they say, in order for food to be halal, you have to say Bismillah when you make the cut. This is like a sentence that's repeated a lot. Everyone hears it. Oh, you got to say Bismillah when you make the cut. You got to say Bismillah when you make the cut. People don't understand that sentence is talking about the cut to the throat of the living animal. When you cut that animal's living throat in order to kill it, that's when you need to say Bismillah. It does not mean that when you got a lump of meat in the kitchen on the counter and you're cutting it into cubes that you need to say Bismillah every time you make a cut. Okay. Some people, they hear things, they don't really understand what it means, but then they go on living their life based off of what they think it means. Okay, that particular woman, she doesn't know how to recognize if meat is halal or not. So even if I trust her, I'm still not going to take her saying about whether something is halal or not because she can't distinguish herself. And yes, one of the brothers just put something in the text box, which is, mashallah, very important. It is also true that haram meat will not become halal just because you say Bismillah on it. Okay, some people, they think that if you take some halal meat, some haram meat, that you just say Bismillah and that makes it halal. No, that's not the case. Okay, there's a hadith where Lady Aisha radiallahu anha, she mentioned to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that some meat has arrived from such and such a group of people, and that group of people had only just recently become Muslim. Okay, she said to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, I don't know if they said Bismillah upon it. And so the Prophet said, well, you say Bismillah and eat. Some people, they hear this hadith, they understand from it that if you have meat where you're not sure if it's halal or not, that just saying Bismillah will somehow make it halal. No, if you have meat that you doubt about, it is haram by ijma, by consensus. It's haram for you to eat meat if you're not sure that it's halal. If you have doubt about the meat, it's forbidden for you to eat it. This is by consensus. Okay, what that hadith means, or at least the way it's understood by the Shafi'is, is that this hadith is a dalil that you actually don't have to say Bismillah at the time of slaughter. Okay, it's recommended to say Bismillah at the time of slaughter. Okay, but as long as the animal was killed in the right way, that if the Bismillah were left out, the meat would still be halal. Okay, so the way to understand that hadith is that it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but whether they said the Bismillah or not does not impact the status of the meat. The meat is still halal. So you say Bismillah and eat it. And you're not saying Bismillah to somehow turn doubtful meat into halal meat. You're saying Bismillah because it's always recommended to say Bismillah before you eat. You understand? MashaAllah. Okay. I'm coming up on an hour, so I'm going to push through the rest of this list real quick. It says dead animals, meta, are najas. So the carcasses of dead animals are najas. It says, or what has separated from a living animal. So if an animal is alive, and someone cuts part of it off, if something separates from the body, whether it was actually cut off or if it just fell off even, if something separates from a living animal, that part which is no longer attached to the animal is considered to be like a dead animal. Okay? So if someone grabs a cat and chops its tail off, that tail, which is now no longer attached to the animal, is najas. It's like a dead animal. Okay? If you have a pet cat, and in the springtime, that cat starts to shed fur, all of that fur, which is separated from the living animal, is najas. That fur is najas. So when you're praying, you want to make sure you don't get cat hair on your body or on your clothing, or that you touch it. You want to make sure you don't touch it when you're making salat, because cat hair is najas. Although in the case of salat, a small amount of cat hair will be excused. So it won't be invalid just because there's one or two cat hairs on you. A small amount is excused. But still, you want to be careful about this, because what separates from a living animal, it's as if it's a dead animal. The exception to that rule is that certain animals that we're permitted to eat, what separates from them while they're alive is not najas. So like sheep, for example, if you want to shave the wool off of a sheep while it's still alive, that wool will not be najas. Feathers from edible animals are not najas. But a feather from like an eagle, for example, since we don't eat eagles, a feather from an eagle is najas. Okay, what else does it say? It says what has separated from a living animal, it's najas. But then it says, except for humans, fish, and locusts. So there are three exceptions to the basic rule. Remember I said what the basic rule is? That animals, while they're alive, they're pure. And once they die, they're najas. Okay, and we mentioned that there's some exceptions to this rule. Dogs, pigs, and things that are part dog or part pig don't follow the rule because they're najas when they're alive and when they're dead. And there are also three things in the other direction that don't follow the rule. That would be humans, fish, and locusts. Humans, fish, and locusts are pure when they're alive, and they're pure when they're dead. Okay, so a fish, after it dies, it's still pure. That's why we can eat fish. Even if it's never been slaughtered, it's still pure. And when I say fish, again, I'm using this word with the Arabic meaning of the word. Okay, meaning anything that lives only in the water is called a fish. Okay, it doesn't matter if that thing, according to English, is not a fish. Okay, if it's like a shrimp, okay, according to English, shrimp is not fish. But because it lives in the water, according to Arabic, it counts as semen. All right, so it's pure even after it dies. Dolphins, whales, these things in English are called mammals, not fish. But in Arabic, they're called fish because they live in the water. Okay, these things, if they die, they are still pure. They do not become najis. The same is also true of locusts. A locust, what's a locust? A locust is a grasshopper. Okay, a locust is a grasshopper. Usually in English, we don't actually call it a locust unless they swarm. So if you get a huge swarm of grasshoppers, we call them locusts. If we just see one or two, we normally call them grasshoppers, but it's the same insect. Okay, these things are pure even after they die, so you can eat them. Cicadas are not locusts. Some people, I don't know why or when, some people started saying locust about cicadas, but that's not what we're talking about here. Here, when we say locusts are pure even after they die, we're talking about grasshoppers, not cicadas. Okay. Number 14, the semen of a dog, a pig, or something that is part dog and or part pig. This is the 14th item in the list of things that's najis. Okay, semen, I mentioned to you earlier, is not najis, it's pure. But if that semen comes from a dog, it's najis. Or if it comes from a pig, it's najis. Or if it comes from something that's part dog and or part pig, then that semen is najis. Okay, because the animal itself is najis and semen is moist. So that semen would be contaminated by the body of the animal it just came out of. Okay, so semen is najis. And last in the list, the 15th and final item in the list of everything that's najis, according to the Shafi'i school, is the milk of an animal that we may not eat. The milk of an animal that we may not eat, except the milk of humans. Okay, so if you think of all the animals that we're not allowed to eat, all the species of things that is not permissible for us to eat, the milk of those things is najis. So, for example, we're not allowed to eat lions. That means lion milk is najis. We're not allowed to eat cougars. So cougar milk is najis. All right, we're not allowed to eat monkeys. Okay, so monkey milk is najis. You understand? Any animal that we are forbidden from eating the flesh of, then we also consider the milk of that animal to be najis. And the only exception to this rule are human beings. Yes, we are forbidden from eating humans, but despite the fact that we're forbidden from eating them, the milk of a human is not najis. Okay, the milk of a human being is not najis. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. I'll take questions now. This is where we'll stop. Otherwise, inshallah, next week, we will start finally with the salat section. With this, we finally completed talking about what you need to know about purification. Purification being one of the 8 conditions to perform a valid salat. So now we can switch into the salat section of the book starting next week. So milk from a kitten is najis. Someone asked, milk for kittens is najis? No, you can give cow milk. Cow milk is not najis. If you have milk from a cow or milk from a goat or milk from a sheep or milk from a camel or whatever other kind of milk they might be selling in these stores, that kind of milk is pure. We can drink it. Okay, and if you want to give it to a kitten to drink, that's fine. But the milk that comes from the mama cat, okay, cats are mammals. They produce milk. Like when the little kittens are born, they suck on their mother's nipples to get milk. If you decide you're going to milk a cat and get a cup full of cat milk, then that cup full of cat milk is najis. Okay, the milk that comes out of the cat is not permissible for us to drink. And if it gets on our bodies or clothes, it needs to be washed off before we make salat. Because if it's not, it will invalidate our prayers. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, in that case, I appreciate you attending. And let's say La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. I just noticed a question here about incontinence. We'll talk about incontinence, inshallah, in the salat section. Barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.